Hi, Dad. Autism is literally meaningless these days, by which I mean we don't know what the word literally means anymore, and the word autism doesn't mean anything anymore either. Um, I was asked to read something by someone I really like, and I'll link to it in the comments. It's an essay about why people are calling themselves autistic, and if I've understood it correctly, then they're saying that uh, that I've got things in common with autism spectrum disorder, but I don't have a disorder, so I don't want a disease label, and so I'm choosing the word autism instead. Um, and that logic flows very nicely, and it makes a lot of sense. And all it really relies on is an ignorance of what the word autism meant when autism spectrum disorder was invented fairly recently. Um, I self-diagnosed as autistic in 2003, which is when my life was falling apart and when I was trying to work out what was going on in my head. Um, and and my first wife and I both read Tony Attwood's book about Asperger's syndrome, and and Attwood was keen to get people calling themselves autistic. He was building a business out of taking, traits like spending 12 hours a day on the computer and having a bit of difficulty having normal conversations. Maybe talking about trains too much, um, and yeah, he was building a business supporting people with who had these traits that were not regarded as clinically significant up until then. The word autism prior to Tony Attwood meant profoundly unable to do social interactions. Um, these are people who were not capable of eye contact at all, who had no concept of emotions and that sort of thing. And there did come in the time after that a realization that there are people who do experience social disability, that is not necessarily social anxiety, um, and who do have a disorder. They do have difficulty functioning, difficulty working, or difficulty maintaining relationships, or difficulty taking care of themselves. And so autism spectrum disorder was this notion that, all right, maybe you don't have autism, but maybe you have something on what we can consider a spectrum of, that has normal at one end and autistic at the other. If you're somewhere in between, you could have a disorder that puts you on that spectrum. Um, and that's where autism spectrum disorder came from. Um, and so the idea that subclinical autism spectrum disorder can be called autism um, is, I mean, I feel like I'm losing this argument, but and we do need to be able to talk about differences between people's brains and differences between the very narrow concept that we seem to have of what is normal. Um, I've spent, I have a mental disorder. I've spent time on a psych ward. I'll be going back in the not too distant future. Um, and and the psychologists there don't talk about normal. They talk about functional. You might talk about healthy even, but normal is just such a horribly abused term because normal in clinical use is actually a very wide spectrum, right? And a normal human being has two arms, two legs, one head, um, really obvious things like that, can breathe. Um, a normal adult can speak in complete sentences in their native language. Um, but our notion of what normal might be has become so narrow, and the American Psychological Association is so keen to milk as much money as possible from as many people as possible. Do you have this constant drive towards using pathology labels to categorize everything? Um, you know, and I think that part of it is that we don't have not pathology labels for the people who piss us off, frankly. If you look at, um, I saw, I saw on Facebook a picture of a woman who she took a photo, she took a selfie of the muscles of her back, um, and she had a lot of well-defined muscles on her back, and there was some stuff about how she was proud of herself for doing a whole bunch of exercise. Okay. And in the comments, there's this woman saying, uh, you know, clearly the person that took this photo has narcissistic personality disorder. No, no. I mean, is it narcissistic to take a photo of yourself and say that you look good? There's an element of narcissism there, sure. There's an element of narcissism in putting a video on YouTube, but my disorder is not narcissistic personality disorder. There's plenty of perfectly mentally healthy people who are capable of promoting themselves, and it just doesn't. It's not a disorder. We can look at various. Well, you look at someone that you hate, right? And there's a very strong tendency to look at people who behave in ways that we don't like, people that we hate, and to say that they've got a mental disorder. That is insulting to people who actually have mental disorders. There's plenty of perfectly mentally healthy people who go around doing evil things. Let's differentiate between disordered, which is when you can't work or you can't maintain friendships or you can't take care of yourself, and bad. There's a lot of bad people in the world. There's a lot of disordered people in the world. Sometimes there's some overlap there, but not every case of bad behavior is something that is treatable. Not every, there's a difference between being an asshole and having narcissistic personality disorder. Some people are just assholes. Yeah. And so I'm very sympathetic towards, I self-diagnosed with autism. I'm not in a position to say that that you're bad if you do that. I was wrong. I did learn the proper use of the clinical terminology and what it means to have a severe deficit. And as a person who engages a lot with, I on a good day, I work alongside clinical people doing one or two things. On a bad day, I'm in the care of clinical people. I mean, even on the psych ward, um, I'm an expert in my particular unusual disorder, and the psychologists were quite interested in the way that I explained it. But yeah, I would really prefer it if words could have meanings and if people would actually understand words before using them and and use clinical terminology for its clinical meaning. I know it is a fundamentally unrealistic expectation that I'm expressing when I say that. But I value my ability to use these words precisely, and so I won't be cooperating when other people are using the folk psychology version of things. Not at the moment, anyway. Yeah. So that's where I am with that. We'll see what happens next.